Angry, it's Dennis from the Australian Rock Show. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Now, since we last spoke, which was about 1 year ago, you and the Tats have been very, very busy. The band did the Monsters of Rock cruise. You toured Europe once again. There was a tour with the Hard-Ons, then another one with the Jets, and shortly there is another European jaunt next month, followed by a long-awaited American tour in May. From a touring aspect, mate, it's wonderful that there is still so much demand for the band.
It is. It's gratifying. It's satisfying. It's very, very complimentary. So it's the thing about it is, in Australia, obviously, and this goes historically. We've always had. There was a big following for any band back in the sort of the mid sort of 70s to the mid 80s. There was the glorious sort of touring period or era. And, so we pulled big crowds no matter where we went, but so did everybody else. And then what happened was that, you formed your niche, if you like, or your cult following. So in Australia, we're limited with the time that we can actually spend on the road, which is kind of okay. It's worked out okay because everyone in the band except me is... like in a relationship and there's children involved and whatever. Mine have all grown up, so. But it's really a testament to the strength of the songs and the music and the early days of touring where the band actually made its mark. And all these years later, we stopped touring with when Mick, the last of the originals, died in 2009. We stopped touring. The last tour we did in Europe was 2008. And then I took this band back 2 years ago now to test the water. And so it had been, 10 years, nearly 10, going on 10 years. But the fans were so hungry for the music. And plus the fact that they acknowledged the credibility of the band playing-wise because, musically it's a beautiful band. They're great musos, they're great players, and, they bring a lot to the music. So it breathed new life, I suppose, into the beast. And because last year was very successful through Europe again, as previous year, and then we got the offer, as you say, to do the rock cruise in America, and there's a lot of agents on the ship, and there was a lot of other bands with their managements, etc. And all of a sudden, the offers started to come in. So, we're really pleased about the way it's going because, in all honesty, and I know that we've talked about this before, there's very limited time for the Tats. I can't see the Tats going past another sort of 4 or 5 years in real terms.
Well, I guess as many fans will know, the band have not toured the US since 1982, and I know, there's quite a buzz amongst North American fans who are excited about these shows. I guess an indication of this is that a couple of the shows at the Whiskey A Go-Go, along with one in New York City, have already sold out. How does it feel to be back on North American stages after such a long time? And the US press back then were not always kind on those 82 shows, and one review with Aerosmith labelled you, quote unquote, a Mickey Rooney with muscles.
Yeah, that's funny as. One of the things that I think endeared, it's one of those curious things about, it's one of the curious things that I think that Americans, in retrospect, seem to have in common with Australians, and not so much the British, but even maybe the Scottish, but certainly some pockets of European. We upset a lot of people on our first tour because of America. We went out with two very, very. We did two very high-profile tours back in those days. We went out with Pat Travers too, on a lesser scale as we did with Nazareth and a couple of. But going out with ZZ Top and Aerosmith, we were playing big stadiums, and they weren't used to what we looked like and what we sounded like, and also our attitude, and they weren't used to one of the things that became very apparent very early in the piece was that they weren't used to people swearing on stage. I mean, Steven Tyler, he said to me, he said, like every now and again, like he'll drop a fuck here or a fuck there or whatever, and but they were sort of like, they were considered to be the bad boys of rock and roll, and I remember him saying to me one day after we'd sort of, it was funny because we'd upset the people because of what was happening. They were very, they wouldn't turn the lights off, and the crowd were very unruly, and they were sort of throwing paper cups and I don't know, cigarette lighters and a whole lot of other shit onto the stage, and they weren't really impressed with the band. I told them basically all to go fuck themselves. I said, you're a bunch of fucking cunts, and no one had ever said that to them on stage before, and I just said, fuck you. And so we did a short. So we only had like half an hour, I think, anyway, or 40 minutes that night, and I said, where I come from, we're taught respect, and respect people, and blah blah blah, and you're just a bunch of fucking ignorant cunts, and you can all get fucked, and basically walked off stage, and then we came back about a week or two later and played the same place. I think it was Rochester, I'm not too sure, but and Stephen said, you can either not turn up if you're worried, and we'll still pay you, it doesn't matter. And I said, no, fuck them. And he said, that's the right attitude. He said, go out there and own the fucking place. And I said, we walked out on stage and said, right, sit down, shut up and listen to the fucking music. And they did. So it was like, even though we were rude to them, they loved it. It was kind of like, that's what I'm saying, that thing about they've got in common with Australians. I mean, Australians like things, like straight up and down. They don't like to be fucked with, and they don't like to be bullshitted to, and they're like that. And then the core of, I kind of felt the same thing, like, and yeah, it's a curious thing that we didn't actually set out to upset people or put people offside, but and we've done it on particularly in the early days, we did it on many occasions, and it was just, that's the band, that's the way the band was in those days. That was the attitude we had, like, was just like, well, fuck you, fuck them all. We had a saying, fuck them all, big and small, fuck them all. And we didn't mean that in a disrespectful or a belligerent way, but, we were so cocksure of what we were doing that you either, liked it, and if you didn't like it, it's too fucking bad, We weren't going to run after people or run after an audience, like begging for acceptance. I mean, that's. I don't think too many bands would have done that or did do it anyway. I mean, I think you earn your place by being who you are, being truthful to who you are and what you are, and then the rest follows on, I think. But yeah, very excited to be back in America. I got to tell you, incredibly fond memories too of the whole experience. I mean, we're not touring obviously on that scale anymore. We're doing a club run, and we found one of the things that we really loved about America was that. Apart from the food and the boobs, actually Mick and I wrote a song about, years later, even though Mick didn't do the States, but he went over there with Heaven, and we wrote a song, bourbon, beer, and boobs. It was a funny little song. It's somewhere on a cassette somewhere, but yeah. But anyway, we remember in between because the big shows would only work 2 or 3 in a row, and then they'd have a night, maybe 2 or 3 nights off. So we were only doing 2 or 3 or 4 gigs within a sort of like a week framework. And of course, being a support band, we played clubs every other night that we didn't work on the big stages. And in some cases, because we were the opening act, we would do the opening, and then we would drive somewhere like not too far away, like an hour or so, drive, and do a club that very night. So, we got to love, as we do here, we love the pubs. We love that whole atmosphere, that whole intimacy, which you can't replicate on a big stage. There's no possible way that you can, but then again, you can't replicate in a small club what you do on a big stage either. But so they both have their respective places. But look, just can't wait to get into the clubs, and can't wait to sort of. And now they're sort of the people who are going to come and see the band. Obviously, were fans then, or became fans then, and also new, like younger kids that have discovered the band, so they know what they're getting, and it's no surprise anymore. I mean, all the other bad boy bands that have come along, after us, sort of like, I suppose, in a sense. So it's no longer shock value. It's just going to be about playing the songs, and and I'm supremely confident this band will just eat them up. We're going to have a fucking ball. We really are.
Well, although we could again dig deep into your rich rock and roll history as we did last time, it is in fact the soon to be released album called Outlaws, which is the purpose of our chat today. And I guess for those who haven't heard our interview from a year back, and for fans who may not know, an obvious first question is, what was the thinking behind having the current lineup re-record the band's debut album, one that George Young astutely labelled as a classic?
It was partial when Mick was still alive, because while he was still alive, we could have re-recorded, and it was a way of celebrating, 40 years. And I kind of thought, should we do it at 40 or should we do it at 50? And then someone said, well, you might not be around at 50 years. So, because 50, like, I think that's a milestone. So the way it worked out, we're kind of in between 40 and 50 years, like, because it's like 3 years over, 4 years over 40, 78, whatever, do the math. But
42.
But there's two things. Management thought it would be a great idea to commemorate, what. Yes, arguably what some people say is one of the great Aussie classic albums, but not that it ever gets mentioned, I might add, in the classic album lineups. But so we wanted to do something, and we thought, well, maybe it's a tour, a 40th anniversary tour. So 2008, which was like our last tour with Mick, for us, it was kind of did what we wanted to do. But we did, both Mick and I, being the major songwriters, there were other songs that got passed over for the cut for the first album, and we kind of wanted to go back and revisit some of those songs. I'm actually going to revisit some of those songs that didn't get on this re-record that Mick and I wrote. I don't think Beer, Bourbon and Boobs will get a run, but...
well, whilst we're talking about lost songs here, I might just chime in and say, any plans to re-record tracks like Fourth Form Fantasy, or are they best left in the vaults?
The thing about that, when that was a rogue album, and it was basically, we'd got a bunch of songs together with Lobby, and in an effort to, and I don't really understand what was going on at that time, because, I wanted to get Lobby into the band as a guitar player, so the band became more experimental, and the band became more like in a different direction if we're going to change from the original lineup. And I know Pete wasn't actually disappointed that once Lovey got in, Mick was playing bass at one stage, and then he moved on. But Lovey came in and said, "Well, we can actually work as a 4-piece, right, 3-piece band singer, while we look for a bass player." But really, Lovey had no intention of playing guitar. In fact, after he played bass for some months, he said, "I don't want to play guitar. I'm over playing guitar." And he was a bit sort of bitter and a bit disillusioned, as I recall. And he said, so the band was sort of like taking on a different identity, music-wise, than when we started, because the two guitar things essential to what the Tats do. So George and Harry, George said, "Have you got any songs?" And we said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "Well, go and do some demos and give us a listen." So we were down in Melbourne living for, I don't know, weeks on at a time, and because Lobby was living in Melbourne at that time, and we went into the studio that he had access to, and just like knocked up some songs and put them together and did them as demos, and took them to Albert's, and Albert said, "Nah, we don't get it, we don't like it. It's not what we have got in mind for the Tats, blah, blah, blah." So basically, find another guitar player or find another bass player and Lobby play guitar, because they were keen. They were not, I wouldn't say maybe excited. They were keen to hear what the band could produce with Lobby in the band. But anyway, when they said, "Look, so we're not going to release the album, and you can't release it because you're obviously contracted to us," and I, to tell you the truth, in retrospect, I was quite happy that they canned it, and they just said, "Look, we're not going to release the album. You need to go away and get another player and write some more songs and get back to what you guys are and what you do, not what this is, And quite honestly, they weren't terribly happy about what we gave them as a bunch of demos, which is what now is being referred to as the lost album, and that's what you're referring to. And no, I don't see those songs getting a reprise with the current lineup or a future lineup. But then again, this lineup's already started writing new material anyway. So, and the good thing about it is that Bobby. One of the reasons I picked Bobby as the other guitar is he has a wonderful background and a history of blues. He's stuff that he's done away from, when he's been left to his own devices, so to speak, is very, very traditional type blues. And had a great band years ago called, I think it was called Black Cat Moan. And I remember going to see them, and they were just playing, pure, 12-bar Chicago type blues. And I just thought, fuck yeah, Bobby's got a real grasp of it. And I think the next album will be, hopefully, there's a couple of songs I've got great hope for that will go on from where Blood Brothers left off, but it will very much go back to very rootsy style stuff.
Good.
Where it's kind of like where Peter wanted to take the band. When Peter saw it as back in the early days, where he saw it as a long-term project, and I remember him saying once he was waxing lyrical, and we were listening to Little Feat and bands like that. And he said, "That's where I hear the Tats going." And I thought that's a very interesting thing, because, I've always loved, those kind of bands like Little Feat and, those kind of American sort of boogie swing bands. Yeah. But what happened was that talking about Mick and I wanting to reprise some tracks that we demoed in the early days. Actually, a couple of those tracks got onto Blood Brothers, one being Creeper and the other one being Man About Town. Even Sweetmeat was a demo from the Assault and Battery album. And but when it came to choosing the bonus tracks for the re-record, I said, well, look, the songs that stick out the most is Snow Queen and Sweet Love, because they were part of what Rylands put together for the first album before he departed. Because, as you know, he left when we started doing demos. He didn't like the direction that George was taking the band in. And but Sweet Love and Snowy were in the set. We used to play them in the set, as we did with Rosetta, and that was a collaboration. But I'm not too sure if it was the earliest collaboration between Ian and I, but it certainly was one of the first two or three that we worked on together. And so they were three tracks that were submitted, and I remember George and Harry having them on the list, but they didn't make the cut. I thought Rosetta actually would take the place of Stuck on You, but for some obscure reason known only to George, after we jammed, and I've told you this story, after we jammed late one night, Stuck on You, and me just singing nonsensical verses, because we had the chorus, but we had nothing for the verses. Came in the next morning, he'd mixed it, and he said, I love that song, I want it to go on the album, in place of Rosetta, which is kind of like,
I think it's wonderful.
Choice. I was actually gutted, to tell you the truth. I thought, fuck, Stuck on You is not, it's just a jam, it's not a song, at least Rosetta's a song.
It is wonderful that after all this time that lost tracks like Rosetta can be dusted off and given new life. And for me, that is one of the album highlights. Let's talk about those lyrics. I saw the love light in your eyes. I saw it fade and so sadly die. Oh, babe, you'll always be the one, the only love for me. Were they yours or Ian's?
No, I wrote the lyrics.
You wrote all those?
Yeah, he had the chorus, and we worked on the I was this is such a cliche story. I was absolutely besotted at the time with a very young girl who followed the band, and she gets a mention in a couple of songs. Actually, she inspired some lines in Nice Boys as well. But there was her, for me, that was she was very young, very vulnerable, and when I say treated badly, she was sort of like passed around, as they used to say in those days. And the time that I spent with her, and I mean, this is it's probably one of my failings in life with romance, is that, like, I fall so hard so easily, for any woman, or most women that I've been involved with. Involved, I mean, had a relationship with, and I fall, like, very deeply. And I did with her, and it's very prophetic, that line, and I'm really, really flattered that you've brought that up, because I could see her future, that if she continued the way she was going, which she did, by the time she got into her 20s, she'd be jaded. Like in Nice Boys, she just wanted to please all the boys. She ended up being nothing but a toy. She burned so hard, she burned her life away. And lies were told, no promises made. And it was, I could just see her future, and it was the classic, like you fall in love with a prostitute, you try to, this is no life for you, come away and I'll look after you. It was a bit like that with me and her, and she was too wild and she was too free, and she was gorgeous and she was in demand. Everyone loved her. Guys were just like lining up to have a taste, and and years later, we sort of romantically we were involved on like 2 or 3 different occasions, like years apart. We always came back together, and it was really sad. It was really sad. But I just wrote that about the kind of girl that she was, that uses herself up, or dries herself up, or is used up, or whatever. Being the hit of the show, being obviously Rosetta's not her real name. That's a fictitious name, but So that's.
Thank you for sharing that. It's good to know the some detailed history about those beautiful lyrics.
Yes. Thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the band, having nearly signed with indie label Champagne Records back in '77, recorded Rosetta, which was originally slated to be the band's debut single, backed with Bad Boy for Love, produced by Gil Matthews. Is that correct?
Not really, no. Do you know Gil? He told me this story some years ago, and we were telling stories, and he said him and Bill were at Loggerheads. He said, mate, I recorded Bad Boy, which he did in Melbourne many years ago, and yes, Rosetta could have been. My memory doesn't serve me that well. I'd be interested to know where you heard that, because Gil, I didn't even remember it until him and Bill were talking about it, because we did a session, Lobby and I and Digger and Pete went to America, and I can't even remember the year, and we went over there to play at a tattoo convention, which Tony Cohen was featured at, and we went and had a week or 10 days or whatever, and we ran out of money, which was hysterical, because it was the typical story of having no money. We had a ticket home, but we couldn't get onto the plane until the ticket came up. Right, we were booked as a flight, and we were basically, we were all living in one hotel room in a fucking Holiday Inn. I think it was in San Francisco. I'm not sure. After we'd sort of left Los Angeles, we went down to, I don't know why we went down to San Francisco, but I remember sitting in a hotel room for a couple of days and, pooling our money to go and buy, like burgers and fries, which is the cheapest thing going that we could get, at this corner shop, which did like a box, which we'd never seen here in Australia. You did a box of burgers or chicken and fries and shit, and it was hysterical. The four of us were in the room together. Oh, actually, Bear. No, that's right. Bear, our roadie, went with us as well. And while we were in Los Angeles, we did a session for Bill at Pasha. He had some sort of deal with Pasha. He had carte blanche because he'd sort of like done the Spaceship album there and a couple of other things he'd done, and he was sort of like a bit of a wheel in those days, and so we went there and we stayed at that. I think it's called the Tropicana. It's not far from Whiskey, but it's a famous rock and roll motel where people have died of overdoses and murders and fucking all kinds of shit. It's like a real deco sort of a motel on Sunset. And, we were sort of living the LA rock and roll thing. But we did a recording session with Billy. And I think, isn't Creeper on that fucking album?
It is on that time period we're talking about.
Yeah, see, that was a song that, like, Mick and I, as I said, we wrote for the Assault and Battery album. or we wrote. We were going to do it on the Assault and Battery album, but it was they chose to go with other songs, but obviously. But anyway, yeah. So that song's been around for a while. But so we did this session with Billy in LA at Parsha, and we recorded Bad Boy, and I think we did Rosetta, and I think we did a bunch of songs. It was about half a dozen songs, and he was going to try and get us a deal on the strength of these demos, right? So anyway, years later, it might have been Boggo Road or somewhere, but I remember him, and we were having talks about those early days. And Gil turned around and said to Bill, because, you know, there was always this rivalry between Bill and Gil, and there was a couple of others. Piggy Morgan was involved when he was in the band, where, you know, they all claimed to have written certain songs or whatever. You know, there was a lot of, you know, argy-bargy, but, you know, good-humoured, but there was nothing belligerent about it. And I remember Billy and Gil said, "Sorry, mate, you're wrong this time," you know, because he loved to lord it over Bill one way, because he was always holding his wealth over Billy as well, which used to infuriate Bill. But, yeah, Gil said, and historically speaking, he was the first, you know, we were in Melbourne. I know that we were there for a few weeks, and Gil took us into some studio. I can't even remember where it was. And we recorded a few tracks, and the original Bad Boy without the riff, without the da 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 da, you know, that. But there was a few tracks that we recorded with Gil in those days, and it's like, you know that thing we did with Lobby. There was another session we did. Well, we did a couple of sessions which produced songs, and one of them, which I'm just about to recut, which is a song called "Legalise, Realise." Mm-hmm. But I'm going to do that with my own band.
Let me hit you with a couple of questions about the
Sure.
forthcoming release. I absolutely love the breakdown in Nice Boys where the band splice in a little Heartbreak Hotel, Lucille, Tutti Frutti, and some blue suede shoes. It works really, really well.
It's, you know, one of the things that really I love about this lineup, and I've loved every lineup. I mean, you know, the Robin Riley lineup was great. An absolute fucking monster of a band, and it was, you know, like, it's a credit to the fact that we're actually able to do what we did with that lineup, because it was just as dysfunctional as the original with Rylands. I mean, you know, heroin addicts, you know, everyone being an alcoholic, well, not alcoholic, but, you know, addicted to alcohol, blah, blah, blah. And it was a wonder that we actually ever did anything of any substance, you know, or quality. But, yeah, but anyway, sorry, I got off the track there.
That's all right. I was just mentioning in Nice Boys, in the current version, the band put in some classics.
One of the things with Rylands, that lineup, and it continued with very much so with Lobby, because of the three-piece was the jamming part, you know, the improvisation that used to take place nightly. Because, you know, it was a blues band format. I mean, we were always been just a very loud blues band. But having said that, one of the things that we enjoyed was, and I love it as a singer, I love going off places and and the band will follow, you know, like, or come with me sort of thing. So, and that comes from my early appreciation of you know, blues singers, where they would spontaneously change a song, you know, or you know, go somewhere. And there was that wonderful psychedelic period too, where, I mean, obviously the Grateful Dead, known for their 2.5 hour long solos, but there was that wonderful period where bands would actually jam, and, you know, very self-indulgently, and sometimes probably to the point where it was, too much. But I've always enjoyed the spontaneity of jamming, so to speak. And the original lineup had that. And then we became sort of more of a well-oiled machine, so to speak, where we lost that ability to, we didn't lose it. We gave it up. The opportunity to freeform, as I call it. And one of the things that we brought back with this lineup, because we started sort of pretty much fresh, apart from Di and I, and Bobby loves to jam, and he and Di are the first. This is the first lineup where the two guitar players actually like one another. Which is like, after all these years, will be a surprise to some people, but none of the guitar players used to. I mean, we've talked about this before. There was not a great. There wasn't animosity. There wasn't. I mean, apart from Mick and Robin, who just fucking hated one another. More hated one another's playing than people, but they got to dislike one another as people because both of them wouldn't give an inch. And I remember arguments where Robin would say, "Well, I want you to try this. I want you to try that," and Mick would just go like, "Nah, I don't fucking want to. I ain't going to do it." It's like, Robin would say, "Well, play a minor chord." Nah, I don't fucking, it was silly shit like that. But
mate, I'm just going to drift back to '78 before we finish up. Next week we'll mark 40 years since Bon Scott passed away. I believe Bon was the first.
Wow, really?
I believe Bon was the first person to, in fact, jam with the band. He and then Angus really were crucial in the band getting signed to Albert's, both having alerted Harry and George about the band. Do you have a favourite memory of Bon from the Bondi Lifesaver days?
Well, if I haven't told you my Bon story or stories, I'd be surprised. But that, the two things, yes. I mean, I can remember. And it goes back to, the Mark Evans, the Phil Rudd thing, like Phil went and joined AC/DC, and then not long after that, Mark did, and that's how I met Mark, and it was all that kind of stuff. And I just remember that, there was a night where Bon had come along, and as full as a state school, and I remember him saying, like, "Can I get up and sing some, can I get up and have a, sing?" I said, "Fuck yeah, So, in those days, the Tats used to do a lot of Chuck Berry sort of Eddie Cochran, 20 Flight Rock and all that kind of stuff, and as covers from the early days. So if we're having a long night, like if we did two sets, or if we were having a great time and we just wanted to keep playing, we'd pull out these, old classics. So Bon grew up on that music, so he knew those songs too. So, yeah, he jumped up and we did two or three songs, of that, that era, and he dragged along, and because Angus is the great sort of, he's got a wonderful history of blues history as far as he knows his blues inside and out, as did Malcolm, but Malcolm was less upfront about the whole thing. But and Malcolm, we got Malcolm to come along too, but for some reason he wouldn't get up and play. But Angus just you couldn't keep him off the stage, so they came. Angus and I think Malcolm only ever on one occasion. I think I don't know. I can't be 100% accurate, but I think we did Jumpin' Jack Flash. But having said that, Angus and Bon got up and jammed with the band on the odd occasion or on the occasion, on quite a few times, and that's what led. Yeah, of course, that's the story. That's what led them to bringing George and Harry along, and how we got signed, yeah.
Well, there are many years in rock and roll where significant rock albums stand out, but it really is astonishing to think that in 1978, Albert's released three of the most iconic records ever recorded consecutively, being AC/DC's Power Age, Face to Face by the Angels, and then the Tats debut. It's a time period in Australian rock and roll which will never be repeated.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, without a doubt. And I think we alluded to this last time we spoke, but one of the things that when we got signed by Alberts, we knew that it was kind of like the mafioso. We were part of the family now. And we could actually say, oh yeah, we're an Alberts band. We're part of the Alberts family. And that's the way it was. And at that time, the vibrancy was like it was resonating off the walls. You walked into King Street and it was like walking into one of those Stargate things. You passed into another world. It was kind of like everything was going on. There was like creativity, and there was like everyone was bursting at the seams. Everyone had songs. Everyone had this amazing energy, and we're going to conquer the world. And we thought as a label that that's what would happen. We thought that, and we felt that in those days. And of course, AC/DC leading the charge. But, I know that George and Harry thought this, even though they never really sort of bragged, if you like, or they never, they went about their business quietly. But we thought that, like AC/DC, the Angels, the Tats, the Choir Boys, even Ted Mulry, in a pop, more of a pop thing, we thought we were just going to as a gang, as a family, as an Alberts stable, we were just going to, go to the world and just like take it all by storm. But such was the feeling of that, and so it's no surprise that we look back on and quite rightly, as you say, producing those albums, because that was the atmosphere. It was kind of like the ground was fertile. There was enough rain and enough sun, and the creativity was like just flowing, and it was just really exciting, to be a part of.
Mate, I recently took a stroll down Arden Street in Coogee and stopped outside the Crown Plaza Hotel, which long-time Eastern Suburbs residents will know was the site of the Oceanic Hotel, a pub which got demolished back in 87. Now, 100-odd years back, it billed itself as Australia's premier hotel and a boon to country and interstate visitors. It was, back in the 1970s, a live venue, and from what I've been told, scene of your very first gig with Rose Tattoo in December of 76. What are your memories of that very first show? Was there an energy you felt?
Not really much at all. The Oceanic was, if memory serves me, was run by Donnie Sutherland in those days. And that was, a lot of people say, oh, well, Checkers was your first gig. Not with the Tats. And it was the old lineup. It was the lineup before, Mick was in it. Digger hadn't yet joined, neither had Geordie, so it was Pete, Ian, myself, Mick, and I can't remember his name, but he's in some of the early photos. It wasn't Nick, the original drummer. It was a guy that came up. Nicky went to jail, and then a drummer came after him. His nickname was Stork. And he's actually in some of the earliest photos of the Tats. And, we played up there. Donnie was the first to give us a gig. And then after that, we got the residency, or we became a resident band at Checkers. And that sort of, most people say, well, that's where we started. But it was actually at the Oceanic, up the top of the hill there, yeah.
We're running out of time, as usual. A random question. Did the band ever write any material when Ryland was back in the outfit on those 1998 shows?
No. We actually talked about it, because we actually naively thought we would stay together as a lineup, as it was as close to the original as possible. I mean, obviously without Digger, but we did talk about it. If we'd have survived, but again, Ian was too restless, and he wanted to. He had very strong ideas about what he wanted to do with the band musically, etc. So, and I think after he and Mick sort of, and they were all, always very close. It sort of degenerated very, very easily and quickly into a sort of a, like they were doing heroin and they were drinking, and like we were all, we weren't. I wasn't doing heroin, but I was still drinking heavily, and it just got messy and dysfunctional, and so we did that tour, and I don't even remember breaking up. I don't even remember calling an end to it. I just remember it was over.
They were some of my favourite gigs, but we'd better finish up. Every guest on our show gets to select a song by an Australian band. Last year you chose Healing Force. What would you like to choose and why?
Gee, I wish I hadn't, because I would have this time. That's a hard one. Goodbye Tiger by Richard Clapton.
Great. Why have you chosen that?
Yeah, I love that song. I love that album.
Yeah.
I love that album. There's a B-side. I think it's a B-side. I'm just trying to think and what it's called, but it's written about. Richard told me he wrote it about sailing, which is a cracker of a song too. But that's a brilliant album. It's. I mean, I love the early stuff, the Girls on the Avenue and all that. I mean, classic. I mean, beautiful song, beautiful songs. But the album that touches me the deepest is Goodbye Tiger. I just find that I don't think it was a huge album for him either.
There's some great material on it, and it's a wonderful way to close out the show.
There's one of his, and he's not the name of the song. It just escapes me, but it brings me to tears, as does Goodbye Tiger. We'll talk about that next time.
Good luck. Thanks for chatting again today. Good luck with the upcoming run of dates in Europe and America, and all the very best for 2020.
Thank you, brother. Thank you very much.